US President Joe Biden has said it was unlikely that a missile that killed 2 people in Poland was fired from Russia. Initial US findings suggest the missile, which hit a Polish village near the Ukrainian border, was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian missile. Poland, which is a NATO member, claims the weapon was Russian-made and has put military units on alert. President Biden, who's in Indonesia at the G20 summit, has pledged his support for Poland's investigation.
And I'm going to make sure we figure out exactly what happened. Our sympathy goes out to apparently 2 people were killed. And then we're going to collectively determine our next step as we investigate and proceed. It's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia. But we'll see. We'll see.
Unlikely.
Poland's Prime Minister has put the country on alert and spoke after the blast occurred, calling for cooperation to establish the cause of the incident.
In cooperation with the Interior Minister, we have placed all services on high alert, including our police officers, border guard officers, and the special forces. We are working with international experts to identify the causes of what happened during this incident. We have invited them to join our experts and our forensics investigators who have already been at the scene for a few hours.
DW reporter Kiejosz Szymanowski is in Warsaw. Put us into context. What are we dealing with here exactly?
Well, as we could just hear the statement of President Biden, who said that it is unlikely that the rocket came actually from Russia. It's the latest development, and there hasn't been any reaction from the Polish government to this information yet. What we know so far is that Poland summoned a Russian ambassador. In the night, the Polish media reports that this meeting has taken place before midnight, and information from the Polish Foreign Ministry was that it was a Russia-made rocket that fell on Polish territory, but Polish authorities were very careful in their wording and also in their messaging during the night. So. Obviously, they didn't want to speculate as to where this projectile could have come from. So I'm expecting to hear from Polish officials today. The morning we will be observing and we will be following their reaction to this latest statements.
Grzegorz, when you say this is a Russian rocket or could be a Russian rocket, are you saying that it could be a Soviet-style rocket? Is that more accurate? And they're ones that are widely used across the area?
Exactly. There is a lot of speculation at the moment. It's not any confirmed information yet, but there is a lot of speculation that it could have been the S-300 anti-aircraft missile, and this is the type of missile that Ukraine is using to defend itself from Russian rockets, from Russian attacks. So this is one possible. This could be one possible explanation for this accident, but as I said, it's nothing the Polish government has confirmed yet.
OK, Poland, of course, is a NATO member. How concerning is this for Poland?
Well, of course, Poland is a NATO member, and any attack on Polish territory could potentially trigger a response from the whole alliance. I think this is why the Polish authorities are treading carefully now. And the Polish Prime Minister, the Polish government announced yesterday that the Polish government is verifying whether to activate the Article 4 procedure of the NATO treaty. This is the article that says about the coordination procedure between the allies. But so we are now waiting to find out whether Poland actually decides to activate this article, and if NATO members coordinate with each other on what could be the proper response to this accident.
Okay, and at the moment, from the statements we're getting from Biden, from Poland, it sounds like world leaders are trying to de-escalate what could otherwise turn into a serious escalation of this war.
I think this is my understanding of the situation at the moment as well. I don't think this has been the position of the Polish government during the night. The Polish citizens were urged to exercise caution, not to spread fake news, not to succumb to manipulation. So I think there is an overall sense of the gravity of the situation, and as to the atmosphere here in Warsaw, I think this is this general sense of calmness and waiting for actual further information prevails. So there is no panic whatsoever. People are calm and following these recommendations to actually stay factual and wait for further information.
Treading very carefully, considering this war has also been a war of information. Grzegorz, thank you very much for bringing us up to date and bringing us clarity on the situation as far as we know at this point, at this hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the view from Ukraine, let's cross over to our correspondent, Jan Philip Scholz. He's in Kyiv. What's the reaction been from the capital?
Well, there haven't been any reactions from high-ranking Ukrainian officials yet regarding the latest findings that suggest that the missiles might have been fired by Ukrainian forces. During the night, President Zelensky still accused Russia of launching the missiles that hit Poland and said it was a significant escalation, and it was something that Ukraine has always warned its Western allies about, and it was time to act. Foreign Minister Kuleba even said that all allegations that Ukrainians might have been involved are just conspiracy theories. So a lot of jumping to conclusions on the Ukrainian side at the moment. But in the morning, I've heard from a lot of Ukrainians that we actually have to be more patient and wait for the ongoing investigations. And there are also voices saying that no matter what the investigations will say, that in the end, part of it is like Russia is to blame for part of it, at least, because without this invasion on Ukraine, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, and the facts still aren't clear, but this appears to have come in response to a massive wave of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine on Tuesday. Let's take a look at that first of all.
The sunset in Lviv is clouded by smoke. The city in western Ukraine was one of many across the country that was hit in what Ukrainian authorities have called one of the heaviest waves of Russian missile attacks since the war began. Officials say many of the missiles were shot down, but in the capital Kyiv, this residential building was hit. We were lying on the bed. We crawled out into the corridor. There was already a burning smell and smoke was coming out of the kitchen. We grabbed our clothes, opened the doors and ran downstairs. It looks like a woman who lived on the floor beneath us was killed. A pensioner. Her balcony was hit. When the missiles struck, Kyiv residents rushed down to the city's subway, seeking shelter anywhere underground. Over months of war, people here have grown used to the constant threat. But the huge number of strikes on Tuesday has rattled Kyiv's residents. I'm shivering and I'm shaking. And naturally, you can't figure out what to do and how to do it. It's unpredictable, especially when you see a huge rocket fly by for the first time. And over here, the incoming missile and the huge flame afterwards. In many parts of the capital, only traffic lights are still on. The strikes have knocked out electricity in several cities and towns, and Kyiv's mayor says half the capital is now without power.
Jan Philip, just how bad is the damage?
As we heard in the report, it is clear by now that it has really been the worst attack since the beginning of the war. About 100 missiles were launched, 70 could be shut down, but it is obvious that the main target was the energy infrastructure. Once again, more than 15 energy sites have been damaged throughout the country, leaving millions of people without power. From what I can see in most neighborhoods in Kiev, at least, power has come back in the morning, but officials warn all residents that the attacks will continue to have severe consequences and there will be continued power cuts in the coming days and weeks.
And I guess this could also see another wave of refugees. Jan Philip Scholz, thank you very much for bringing us up to date from Kyiv there. A tense 24 hours here in Europe to help make sense of it all. I'm now joined by Mike Martin, War Studies Senior Visiting Fellow at King's College London. Mike, the conflict in Ukraine now appears to have spilled over the border into Poland. Was it only a matter of time before something like this happened?
The short answer is yes. If you have a conflict of the type of intensity that we've had now for several, 8 months, 10 months in Ukraine, with tens of thousands of missiles and projectiles being fired on most days, it's inevitable that something like this, which seems actually to be an accident, will happen.
Ukraine was quick to call this an attack on a NATO member, though. What's your view on that?
Well, from the very beginning of the war, Ukraine has been trying to bring its allies closer in. For instance, at the beginning of the war, they were calling for a no-fly zone policed by NATO aircraft. And of course, we would do this as well if we were Ukraine. The more that they can get Western allies involved, the more supplies are likely to come, but also the harder it is for those Western allies to disengage from the war at some point in the future.
As we've heard, Ukraine's allies have been treading a bit more carefully as far as these latest developments go. What do you make of their arguably more measured response?
I think right from the beginning of the war, both sides, so Russia and NATO, have tried very, very hard to keep the conflict contained within the borders of Ukraine. Calls for a no-fly zone were put down. Russia's nuclear posturing and threats were also put down, because as terrible as the war is in Ukraine, a wider war would be a complete disaster. And so this latest incident, 2 people killed, in a NATO country, both sides are going to be very hard to continue to de-escalate, to talk it down and make sure that the conflict stays within the borders of Ukraine.
Can you de-escalate the situation right now? I mean, it's intense, the bombings that were going on yesterday. How are things going to look in the coming days and weeks as far as the battle between Russia and Ukraine goes?
So I think what Russia is trying very hard to do is to set up the conditions for the winter. And so that is why it's focusing mostly on energy generation, water treatment plants. By the way, these are war crimes if you're attacking infrastructure that's supplying civilians. What they're trying to do is to put pressure on Ukraine so that it's unable to mount an offensive over the winter. But it does seem that Ukraine is going to continue fighting over the winter. It's better equipped and has better morale than Russian troops. So Russia is trying very hard to make that as difficult as possible for them.
Mike Martin, thanks for the analysis.
Thank you.
Well, world leaders of the biggest developed economies, the Group of 20, are gathered right now in Bali. Members of the G7 and European Union have held emergency talks. Our correspondent is also there, Georg Mattes. Georg, Biden was part of the closed-door round table. Can you tell us more?
That's right, Ben. In an emergency meeting with the leaders of the G7 as well as NATO members, he had this emergency meeting where he basically expressed full support for the Polish investigation of what has exactly happened there. Some more details we already have. And that was followed by a clear condemnation of the latest Russian aggression. The American president spoke of scores and scores of missiles raining down on Ukraine as leaders here in Bali are trying to de-escalate the situation. And that is also how Joko Widodo, the host of this G20 meeting, the Indonesian president, started today's second summit day by saying, "Stop the war. I repeat, stop this war."
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also made a statement. Let's just listen into that.
I spoke to President Duda a few hours ago and conveyed my condolences and the sympathy of the citizens of our country to the people of Poland. This is a terrible incident. It's necessary to carefully clarify how it came about that this destruction could happen there.
Georg, tell us a bit more about how other global leaders are reacting.
Yeah, it's strong condemnation from a number of leaders, particularly France and the UK, were very fast to come forward with clear messages to Russia. And then you have some breaking news right now that, according to diplomatic sources, the joint declaration of this summit has been signed. That would be a huge success for the Indonesian presidency because it contains a clear condemnation of the war with a wording that most countries of this G20 summit are condemning the war in Ukraine. Literally also with the word war and not conflict, as Russia had insisted there. So that is a clear win for all the countries here that have been pressing hard that this summit needs to send a clear message to Russia to end this war.
And the reaction from China. I know Chinese officials have held back quite a lot over the past half year as far as Russia's full invasion of Ukraine goes.
Well, so far China has tried to stay pretty much out of the whole discussion on the war in Ukraine. We have seen this position shift slightly in recent days with the Chinese today and also yesterday, for instance, praising the Russian message that one does not condone any nuclear threats. Then there's also a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry that says they welcome that Russia is open for dialogue, and they also welcome that Russia is open to prolong a deal that has been made with Ukraine to allow grain coming out of Ukraine and also fertilizer, which is quite crucial. So all of this tells us, and also the fact that there is now a joint declaration signed by China, all of us tells us that the patience of countries like China, but also India, is really running thin with Russia fighting a war that has been inflating prices, not just of energy, but of food as well.
Georg, on that topic, I know wheat prices and oil prices skyrocketed on these developments as they came through last night, but then settled down somewhat. Still, global energy and food supplies are in focus. How are leaders there reacting, and are they making progress on that front?
Well, one has to say that the Indonesian presidency was very careful in working something out that really practically helps in this crisis. And so the Indonesian president went through a whole marathon of bilateral meetings. There was a 2-day food conference ahead of this G20 meeting to hammer out some concrete proposals that could be put ahead of leaders. For instance, when it comes to the supply of the basic products you need to create fertilizer. I spoke on the sidelines of this summit to someone from the fertilizer industry who told me that basically the whole industry is at a standstill. Prices have gone through the roof. And so it is really important that one works out ways to finance fertilizer, but also to allow fertilizer products to come out of Ukraine and Russia into the rest of the world. So a very concrete example of how the problem of the global food supply can be resolved.
Georg Martis in Bali, thank you very much for your analysis. Well, regional leaders have expressed solidarity with Poland. The Czech Prime Minister said if Poland confirms that the missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. We stand firmly behind our EU and NATO ally. The Lithuanian president said, keeping close contact with our Polish friends, Lithuania stands in strong solidarity with Poland. Every inch of NATO territory must be defended. And the Latvian Deputy Prime Minister said, my condolences to our Polish brothers in arms. Criminal Russian regime fired missiles which target not only Ukrainian civilians but also landed on NATO territory in Poland. Latvia fully stands with our Polish friends and condemns the crime.